Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is an in-depth breakdown and analysis of House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 3. Rhaenyra pulled a sister act, and Daemon's dreaming of some creepy stuff. But I got you covered with a shot-by-shot breakdown of this episode, the visuals, the lore from Fire and Blood, and all the deeper layers of meaning. And for any speculation for plot details from the book beyond this episode, we're gonna save that discussion for the spoiler dungeon at the end of the video. Let's get started. The opening tapestry art was updated for episode 3, whereas episodes 1 and 2 went from Aegon II on the Iron Throne and Rhaenyra on the Dragonstone Throne to a wider shot of their releasing ravens and dragons to the various lords of Westeros, followed by Vhagar eating Luke and Arrax. Now, after Rhaenyra, we go to this new shot of the late young Prince Jaehaerys, who was slain by blood and cheese when his body was put on display in the Green's funeral procession, surrounded here by candles, meaning the body could now be in the Sept, where Alicent and Rhaenyra in this episode. We learned in the episode 2 behind the scenes video from HBO that thankfully they created a prosthetic of the young actor's body out of silicone for this shot in the funeral procession sequence. But the fact that we go from Rhaenyra in the tapestry to this bloody line crossing Jaehaerys' neck reflects how many in the realm blame her for his death. That same kill line now weaves left as the rope that hangs all of the rat catchers of the Red Keep, King Aegon's overkill retribution in episode 2, which activated opponents like Ulf the White in this episode. The rope is golden, the same color the new green-themed Targaryen banners, updated from a three-headed red dragon to a gold dragon as a decision by Aegon to distinguish from Rhaenyra and the Blacks to reflect his golden dragon Sunfire, now on Hightower green. The blood from these rat catchers continues to flow onward toward the Iron Throne, showing that this blood will trigger more blood and more violence as violence begets violence. We open on a mill near the Red Fork in the Riverlands, land controlled by House Bracken. House Bracken, who support the Greens, and House Blackwood, who support the Blacks, came up in Season 1. The young lords Willem Blackwood and Gerald Bracken fought for Rhaenyra's hand at Storm's End, and the historic turf war between the families was discussed by the Small Council in Season 1, Episode 6.
The Brackens and the Blackwoods will use any excuse to spill each other's blood.
This episode uses the Brackens versus the Blackwoods as a cautionary tale for never-ending family feuds. Like the Targaryens now at war with each other, these names are similar and easily confused, and they share ancestral kin. But that's really the point. These conflicts ultimately have their origins forgotten about, and both families end up destroyed in equal measure, as we later get this warning in this episode.
Sin begets sin, begets sin.
But we are seeing the farmland through part of the rotating mill. Rotation that I think reflects the cyclical nature of the historic violence between families and how it's really a self-perpetuating wheel that just repeats a cycle. It's reminiscent of this family's descendant, Daenerys' line in Game of Thrones Season 5.
Lannister, Targaryen, Baratheon, Stark, Tyrell. They're all just spokes on a wheel. I'm going to break the wheel.
A desire that she seemed to just forget about in the final season. Or you could say she might have been infected with the same destructive family cursed madness as all of her ancestors. Lord Samwell Blackwood demands that Sir Aaron Bracken move the boundary stones back because their livestock are encroaching on his land, and Bracken brings up the assize at Riverrun, which is a term for a medieval era court order that would have been issued by Lord Grover Tully at Riverrun, deciding where the boundary line would be between Bracken and Blackwood. Lord Grover Tully is described as a flaccid old fool later this episode, and yes, George R. R. Martin named him and its descendants Elmo, Kermit, and Oscar after Muppets. So what we are seeing here is the beginnings of the battle at the Burning Mill, which actually occurs a bit later in Fire and Blood after Daemon takes Harrenhal. Sir Aaron Bracken is a new character for the show, taking the place of Sir Amos Bracken in Fire and Blood, but Sir Amos has been cast in this season as Tim Faraday, so it just seems like the show might have different plans for Sir Amos. In Fire and Blood, Sir Amos kills Lord Blackwood in single combat, but Sir Amos ends up killed by a weirwood arrow to the eye from Lord Samwell's sister, Alysanne, aka Black Ally, and she goes on to be the second wife of Cragen Stark, who we met in the season premiere. Yes, it's a very small world. Sir Aaron calls Samwell Blackwood a babe killer, accusing the false queen Rhaenyra of Jaehaerys' murder. Blackwood accuses Bracken's uncle, who I think would be Lord Humphrey Bracken of Stonehenge, who has been cast in the season as Chris David Storer, accusing the old man of declaring for Aegon, which implies that in some parts of Westeros, the assumed position has always been that Aegon is a usurper, and Otto's line that Aegon was weak after a rushed coronation holds some truth in these outer territories, and that really both sides of this episode are undervaluing Rhaenyra's position throughout the realm. Bracken draws his sword.
You wouldn't dare.
And now Bracken himself is the one with that very same sword in his neck, which tells us that Bracken at some point must have lost control over the sword during the fight and it got turned on him. Another example of how these types of conflicts really just lead to our own destruction. The camera cranes up from the dead Bracken to a field of hundreds of corpses, and the mill is now burned and moving more slowly, this being the burning mill of the battle at the burning mill. But this shot is an homage to the iconic shot in Gone with the Wind of the wounded Civil War soldiers after the Battle of Atlanta, the camera pulling out to show the full breadth of the carnage in a different brother versus brother civil war. Speaking of brother versus brother, we cut directly to the fallen brothers from episode 2, Sir Arik and Sir Erik, buried together now on Dragonstone. Jace says Arik sullies Eric's grave, but Rhaenyra responds,
I cannot fault him for keeping his oath,
signaling her compassion for those from the Greens just trying to do their duty, and why Rhaenyra might be more open this episode to seeking peace with Alicent. So long as she thinks characters are doing their duty, there's always a path to peace there. You'll notice that Rhaenyra now has a cut on her cheek that she must have gotten during the scuffle with Sir Erik and Sir Arik in episode 2, but I don't remember when exactly her face would have gotten cut like this, but the fact that she was grazed at all shows how close Arik's sword really came to killing her. Rhaenys makes the point that no one ever agrees on how these conflicts begin. Was it when Jaehaerys was beheaded, or Aemond killing Luke, or Luke taking Aemon's eye? The fact that these are the three examples that she singles out, though, is kind of like the inverse of a compliment sandwich. It's kind of like a criticism sandwich, right? You start with and you end with a heinous act committed by the Blacks. And Rhaenys even omits the Greens' recent assassination attempt that led to Rhaenyra having the scar on her cheek that probably stings her as they're talking. But Rhaenys' point is that the reasons for wars just get lost over time, and ultimately everyone just remembers that both sides ended up with blood on their hands. Rhaenys mentions that Alicent did come to her in the hours after Viserys' death and worried about the bloodshed that would come from it, which gives some context to why Rhaenys didn't have Meleys kill Alicent and the Greens at the coronation. She might have been hoping that that restraint would avoid this upcoming war between kin.
There is no war so hateful to the gods as a war between kin.
It's an interesting line for the show, and we're going to talk about how these wars between kins might cause the gods to intervene in interesting ways through supernatural divine intervention in this episode in particular. Rhaenyra says that even though it may be the men around Alicent seeking bloodshed, Alicent still permitted it. Rhaenys shoots back, as you permitted the murder of a little boy in his bed. It's a bit of omniscient wisdom from Rhaenys. Both Alicent and Rhaenyra are mothers blaming each other for actions that they never wanted the immature men around them to commit. And then we get this awesome transition from an overhead shot of dirt shoveled onto Arik and Erik to a from below shot of Sir Criston Cole, suggesting that it was his stupid order that buried both these guys. Sir Criston now wears the golden hand necklace that, along with the hand pin, connotes a position of the hand of the king. His page asks,
"Is all well, Lord Hand?"
Yeah, notice how the page's words are initially muffled, as if Sir Criston is drowning underwater, and we are reminded of how Alicent seemed to be trying to drown herself for at least a moment in the bathwater last episode. After Sir Criston got on Sir Arik's case just for eating before he could have time to change his muddy cape from the young late prince's funeral procession, Sir Criston now says nothing to the new King's Guard sitting on the job in front of the whole court. Now, these two knuckleheads, and the later in Aegon's chamber, are Aegon's three drinking buddies. New to the show this season, Aegon replaced Sir Criston, Sir Arik, and Sir Erik with these three idiot friends. The blonde is Martin Rain of House Rain, famously destroyed by Tywin Lannister, leading to the Rains of Castamere song that uses wordplay on the word rain. The other on the steps is Eddard Waters, a bastard hedge knight. Waters is the bastard surname used in the Crown Lands. And the third we see is Leon Estermont, that's the one with the curly hair. House Estermont comes from the Stormlands. The small council meeting begins with everyone roasting Sir Criston for his dumb deployment of Sir Arik. This roasting led by Master of Laws Ironrod, who likely envies that fancy hand chair directly across from him. Alicent piles on too, but only Aemond comes to Criston's defense, shifting the conversation to the Brackens versus the Blackwoods at Burning Mill. And during all this, Aegon fiddles with Aegon the Conqueror's Valyrian steel dagger, having no idea of its importance, slinging it around kind of like a prop to look more fearsome, like the Conqueror's armor that he wears later on. And notice how directly across from him is Aemond, and it was this dagger that Alicent tried to use on Rhaenyra's sons to avenge the fact that Aemond's eye had been slashed out by Luke. Tywin Lannister says that both sides took heavy losses, so after Erik and Arik were essentially traded knights in this game of chess, Blackwood and Bracken are really just several traded pawns. Grand Maester Orwyle says that they need to appeal to Lord Grover Tully to handle the Riverlands, while Ironrod reminds us that Uncle Ormond Hightower is marching from Old Town, where Daemon and his dragon Tessarion are again mentioned. Daemon is Alicent's fourth kid who has not yet been cast for this show, and I'm wondering if HBO might be saving him for season 3 to cast as a bigger name to replace any big talent we might lose this season and next. I'm not saying who, this ain't the spoiler dungeon, but you know, this wouldn't be hot D if we didn't have some hot deaths. Tywin Lannister disses Orwyle for having no Maester chain link for military strategy. Indeed, most of the Maester's chains are for things like sciences and academia and their version of medicine. But prior to Aegon's conquest, the center of power in Westeros was at Old Town, with the Citadel being the intelligence behind that power. During this crosstalk, Aemond flips a gold coin over his fingers. This is the same coin that he found in his room after Blood and Cheese. What was once a symbol of his own dance with death is now something he's no longer afraid to flirt with. Sir Criston proposes to lead his own small host into the Riverlands to take Harrenhal, using hosts from castles that they gain in the Crown Lands along the way. Clearly, he just wants to get the hell out of King's Landing this moment because he is terrible at the political game. Aegon proposes to join them with Sunfire, but now it is Aemond who cautions against his brother putting himself in harm's way.
It's a brave thought, but we cannot risk your loss.
The actor Ewan Mitchell does not blink once during this line, and it's something that he often restrains from doing to unsettling effect. But with one eye covered in an eye patch, it helps give him power to never even blink. Kind of like Ironrod envying the hand seat opposite him, we get the sense that Aemond might be envying the seat directly across from him. Rhaenyra talks to Mysaria after her warning saved the queen's life last episode, and notice how throughout the scene, the dragon Sea Smoke off in the distance keeps interjecting and distracting Rhaenyra.
I would think you would wish to reward me. A place at your court.
Mysaria gets rattled too and suggests that maybe the dragon is lonely. This would be Mysaria's first bit of counsel as part of Rhaenyra's small council, turning Rhaenyra's anxiety of a riderless dragon circling them into a possible opportunity. Now, Rhaenyra here does not go into why Sea Smoke is restless, and she just kind of says, you know, my husband's dead, and that's why the dragon is riderless, bye. But remember, in the show, Laenor is still alive, only in the book he's dead. So it kind of seems like Rhaenyra is agitated and just saying like, I'm so tired of having to pretend like Laenor's dead because it's creating this tension between myself and Daemon and Corlys and Rhaenys. And the look that she gives Mysaria suggests that, does Mysaria know that Laenor might still be alive? Rhaenyra tells Rhaena that Rhaena will accompany Joffrey to the Vale, where Joff and his young dragon Tyraxes, in exchange for an army from Rhaenyra's cousin, the Lady Jane Arryn, will help make that deal. Remember, Rhaenyra's mother was Aemma Arryn, so she is part Arryn, but Rhaena protests.
Tyraxes is better hatchling. And Stormcloud.
I want you to go with them.
Stormcloud is the name of the young dragon belonging to Rhaenyra's elder son with Daemon, the silver-haired boy Aegon the Younger. In another video, I broke down all 25 dragons during the Civil War and who their riders are. I think that's just going to be a helpful video for everyone watching the show. Rhaenyra tells Rhaena that she's to take these boys, Aegon and Viserys, those are the two boys that we saw Rhaenyra playing with in episode 2, beyond the Vale to Pentos, to Prince Regio Heratis. That was the ruler of Pentos who hosted Daemon and Laena back when they had their daughters Baela and Rhaena there, and season 1, episode 6. But Rhaena just remembers Pentos as
When my mother died.
and not just where her mother died, but died via self-immolation from Vhagar, the dragon that should have been Rhaena's but was taken by Aegon. And as safe as Rhaenyra says that they'll all be in Pentos, there's always the risk that that WMD could still find her there and end her the same way that that dragon ended her mother. But Rhaenyra tells Rhaena to be the mother to Aegon and to Viserys that she cannot be.
Teach them, train them, guard them as a dragon guards her eggs.
But really, just by comparing Rhaena to a dragon at all stings, because unlike her sister Baela, a dragon still has not hatched and bonded to her. Daemon and Caraxes fly toward Harrenhal through a storm over the God's Eye Lake, over the Isle of Faces in the middle of that lake, one of the largest groves of weirwood trees remaining in Westeros, as it was a sacred site of the pact between the First Men and the Children of the Forest. And you could actually see the top branches of a few taller weirwood trees sticking up from that island. And listen closely as Caraxes flaps over these trees. Yes, you can hear a male voice crying out in the music, but what's weird about it is these vocalizations in the music are only on this shot when the dragon is flying over the Isle of Faces, which suggests to me that the old gods might be observing this war among kin unfolding, and it is a war that insults them the most and might particularly in this moment be marking Daemon Or who knows, maybe the voice is the three-eyed raven, Bran, seeing through these trees backward through time. Because remember, in Game of Thrones, the later seasons, they imply that every rearwood tree throughout any point in Westerosi history could be seen through the eyes of Bran. There is this awesome point of view shot from Daemon behind Caraxes' neck as we approach the towers of Harrenhal, where you can see the stone is still melted from the fire of Balerion the Black Dread during Aegon's conquest. Actually, the armor and helmet Daemon wears here is fashioned to look like Balerion. So in a way, he is cosplaying as the Conqueror by retaking Harrenhal. But it's like pathetic because Harrenhal is basically unoccupied. Daemon lands Caraxes on the tallest tower and he lets the dragon let out a roar. There's that deviated septum wheeze from Caraxes again. Daemon landed the dragon here on the tallest tower so that the roar would be heard the loudest and furthest, but it's such a pathetic sound that undercuts the power, much like Daemon feels as he takes the castle with hardly any resistance and just kind of walks around a haunted house and himself looks pretty shaken as he does so. He enters his castle alone, the lightning illuminating the rain-soaked, misshapen stone in such a way that it creates these eerie shadows and shapes. Harrenhal is rumored to be haunted, specifically by a ghost of Harrenhal, which was actually the title of Game of Thrones Season 2, Episode 5, that ghost actually in that episode functionally being Jaqen H'ghar and the deadly favors that he did for Arya Stark. But all those deaths people thought were being caused by a ghost. In Fire and Blood, it's believed that the ghost of Harrenhal was the one who started the fire that killed Harwin Strong and Lionel Strong. But in House of the Dragon, Season 1, we learned that it was Larys Clubfoot who sent the assassins to kill his own family members. But the atmosphere of Harrenhal in these shots is just so spooky. From the melted walls to the gnarled roots of trees growing up through the stonework, the trees reclaiming this property. Part of the rumors of the castle's haunted nature come from the fact that weirwood trees were cut down to build on top of it. And now it seems like new weirwoods with faces in them might be reclaiming the castle. I mean, just look at any roots long enough, you're gonna start to see faces. It's a psychological instinct called pareidolia. But particularly in this shot of Daemon, in the distance on the background left, it's framed in such this weird way where we focus on the foreground center, this twisted tree, which, you know, causes our eyes to play all kinds of weird tricks. But in the background on the right, look in the archway over there. Doesn't it for a second look like there might be a veiled woman staring across the way at Daemon? It probably isn't a woman, but you know, just the length of these shots has us just looking everywhere for ghosts. Daemon comes upon the room where the very first scene of the series took place, the Great Council of 101, where his older brother Viserys, the first, was chosen as king. And you get a sense from him that, you know, he is desperate now to crown himself as a ruler. The burnt banners that hang bear the sigil of House Strong, the version they used in the TV series. 3 rivers, one red, one blue, one green, on a field of white, flowing from a black coat of arms displaying a white hand. These banners would be hanging and burned since Larys' assassins' attack on Lionel and Harwin. It's still under the possession of House Strong, in whatever form House Strong is right now, because in their place has taken over the aging Sir Simon Strong, played by Simon Russell Beale, a celebrated English stage actor who played the silly Dionysus in Thor Love and Thunder. Sir Simon bends the knee and pledges fealty to Rhaenyra, but in walks in this dark-haired woman. This is Alys Rivers, played by Gail Rankin, and she does not bend the knee. She just kind of stands, governed by a power beyond these petty squabbles. Earlier, it seemed like Daemon might have heard a sound behind him that caused him to turn. And the way he looks at Alys now, he seems like he might suspect it to be her. There's some familiarity. Now, Alys Rivers might be the most interesting new character this season. In Fire and Blood, she's introduced as the wet nurse of Harrenhal, a bastard sired by Lord Lionel Strong. Every contributing historian has a different take on Alys Rivers, though. Munkin says she was a serving wench interested in potions. Eustace says that she was a woods witch. Eustace, like the more boring factual of the historians. Mushroom claims Alys was actually from an older generation and served as a wet nurse to Harwin and to Larys Clubfoot, and that she was an enchantress who bathed in maiden's blood to remain youthful. And there's like an implication there that, you know, due to her impact on Sir Harwin Strong might have led to his seed being so strong that that's what led to Rhaenyra bearing 3 sons, the bastard sons that changed the fate of these families' line of succession, and that if she had an impact on Larys, that could have imbued Larys with some kind of supernatural ability and like a divine insight into all these machinations. But also think about it, if she's related to the strong lineage, and if she fed Harwin, that would connect her to Rhaenyra's sons, Jace and Joffrey. In Fire and Blood, she actually accompanies a different character, but here on the show, they are attaching her to Daemon, and that's a new choice, a very interesting choice, and we'll get to why later. But real quick, I love Woods Witches and George R. R. Martin's lore, because they have been deeply important to the fate of a number of characters in Westeros. Later on in history, King Jaehaerys II will force his son Aerys and his daughter Rhaela to marry each other after he was influenced by a Woods Witch that was brought to court by Jenny of Oldstones. This witch prophesied that the prince that was promised would be born of the Targaryen line. Yes, Jenny of Oldstones, the same Jenny from the song. So now that House of the Dragon is motivating characters with Aegon's dream and the prince that was promised that comes up at the end of this episode, we just have to wonder if Alys Rivers might see this prophecy in Daemon's bloodline with Rhaenyra through their sons Aegon and Viserys, and that maybe even Alys Rivers, a multi-generational witch who bathes in blood to keep herself young, could have been that same Woods Witch generations from now who befriends Jenny of Oldstones and passes this information onto Jaehaerys II. Now, on the back of Sir Simon's chair is a figure with armor and chainmail around his head holding a helmet. I'm wondering if this could be Harren the Black or a knight from before his time, because, you know, the chair would have been constructed when Harren had just completed this castle when Balerion arrived. Still, it's just interesting that this right here is the best chair for the Lord of Harrenhal to sit in for supper, despite how burned it is. Daemon refuses to dine the venison and peas, suspecting they could be poisoned, suggesting that both Daemon and Alicent share suspicion of the Strongs due to Larys' treachery.
Larys Clubfoot is no lord of mine.
Yes, he calls him Clubfoot to show disdain for his relative, and points out that his nephew Lionel Strong and Harwin Strong dying in a fire in a damp castle, a place where they struggle to ignite the fireplaces, is proof enough for him that it was really arson and murder. Yet it's interesting that Sir Simon doesn't account for the ghosts that Daemon later finds this night. Sir Simon calls Daemon my prince, and Daemon corrects him saying your grace, which turns everyone's heads.
I'd only assumed that as consort.
And we are reminded of the perilousness of assumption.
Indeed.
So, according to custom, Rhaenyra would be the queen through her father Viserys. He named her heir, and that Rhaenyra's husband, Daemon, should carry the royal title of Prince Consort, like Queen Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, whom Matt Smith ironically played in the first 2 seasons of The Crown. Wives of kings are called queen consorts, husbands of queens are called prince consorts. That's just the way it works. But the designation of Your Grace is reserved for the one sitting monarch, because they have their role by divine right, a blessing from the gods. You would not normally call the prince consort Your Grace. So Daemon's correction would sound like treason to Sir Simon, as it disrespects Rhaenyra as queen, but also it defies the gods. It's like trying to leech onto that divine right that you were never supposed to receive. Now, Daemon may be trying to declare that he and Rhaenyra are equals in marriage and co-rule, similar to the way Aegon the Conqueror made his sister wife Visenya Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, but I don't think anyone called both Aegon the Conqueror and Visenya Your Grace, especially since their marriage wasn't really blessed by the faith of the Seven at that time anyway. And when Aegon the Conqueror died, the crown went to his son Aenys. It just seems like after Daemon and Rhaenyra's fight last episode, he just can't get over not having a crown himself, and he probably misses that driftwood crown that he got in the Stepstones. And now he's trying to carve his own divine right, but he's doing so in this haunted, empty castle, and by doing that, he is pissing off the gods of this world. Daemon orders to summon Lord Grover Tully, despite the man's old age.
People should obey their liege lord, whatever his condition.
I sense that Daemon might be referring to his brother Viserys in his later years, and how Alicent and Otto took advantage of his dementia to subvert his will. In the Red Keep, we follow this squire on this awesome tracking shot as he's bringing this note to Sir Criston. They're able to pull off this shot because the courtyard set was expanded in the Red Keep in their construction for season 2. This was shown in the behind the scenes video for the season 2 premiere. And I just like how the busyness of this courtyard is a direct contrast to the vacancy in the haunted Harrenhal that we just saw Daemon pathetically squatting in. We see Criston Cole got a fresh cut, and you know that didn't tip his barber. Alicent introduces her brother Sir Gwayne Hightower from Old Town, but Sir Criston might have crossed paths with him in the past. Sir Gwayne appeared in the very first pilot episode of the series in The Tourney. Daemon took out Gwayne's horse's leg, which is a real punk move, and messed up Gwayne's face. At that point, he was played by stunt performer Will Willoughby. Now he's played by Freddie Fox. So think about it. Sir Daemon unhorsed Sir Gwayne, and then Sir Criston ended up defeating Daemon. So you can imagine the ego that Gwayne may have now that he sees Sir Criston. And he shades him for ascending stepping into his father's role as Hand of the King, despite coming from what he says are humble beginnings, reminding everyone that he is a Dornishman. Sir Criston was not from Dorne in Fire and Blood, but they did make him from there in the show, which is interesting because Dorne was the one kingdom of Westeros that the Targaryens never conquered. Sir Criston asks for Alicent's favor. Now, in that tourney in the pilot episode, Daemon asked for and received young Alicent's favor, while Criston Cole got his favor from young Rhaenyra. And now it kind of seems like he's trying to correct that history and show that he wishes he had gotten Alicent's favor on that day instead of Rhaenyra's. He says
that her Lord Commander may go into battle with her blessings in his heart.
That quick little smile for Alicent that he allows and then quickly wipes away is why I think the actor Fabian Frankel deserves all the credit in the world for his performance. He's getting bullied online, and that's such bullshit. Folks, their job is to act. They are different people when they go home from work at the end of the day. And he's doing such a good job on the show, playing this walking corpse, living on borrowed time, granted to him by Alicent stopping his death in the Godswood. And now he just kind of needs these refuels of affection from Alicent in order to keep going. A crow picks at the eye socket of the still hanging Ratcatcher cheese, a literal feast for crows to pay homage to George R.R. Martin's Book 4 title, and we cannot show you the image here because YouTube. But the episode 2 behind the scenes featurette showed that they actually used a mix of dummies and seemed like pretty safe rigging for the actual actors to be in the hanging scene. Like, it actually was Mark Staubert there. But the reason we're seeing it now is much like the decision to execute the Ratcatchers, Sir Criston Cole's small host through the Crownlands toward Harrenhal is just a foolish pursuit by the Greens. Sir Criston's host exits King's Landing through, I think that is the Old Gate, because here in this shot you can see the dome-roofed dragon pit right behind it, and the Red Keep Castle is way distant on the other corner of the city in the background. The Old Gate is supposed to be on the northwestern wall of the city and follows the King's Road north into the Crownlands, past Rosby and toward Harrenhal, though I will admit Blackwater Bay appears closer into the right more than it should, and in the next shot it kind of looks like they're marching south toward the Stormlands, which would be the opposite direction of where they're actually going. But from this shot we follow Rhaenys into Rhaenyra's Black Council on Dragonstone, including Sir Steffon Darklyn, Lord Simon Staunton of Rook's Rest, Sir Alfred Broom, Lord Gorman Massey of Stonedance, Lord Bartimos Celtigar of Claw Isle, Grand Maester Gerardus, and Sir Laurent Marbrand. But Daemon's seat directly to Rhaenyra's right is left empty because none of them would dare sit in it. Sir Alfred says to send all of the dragons out because, unlike the other lords, Sir Alfred is from Dragonstone. He's a knight that's loyal to the Blacks right now, and he doesn't have a home or lands or family back in the Crownlands, and thus has nothing to lose by suggesting this. But Rhaenyra pushes back.
If dragons begin fighting dragons, we invite our own destruction. Fear of it is in itself a weapon.
And she assumes that the Greens would be making the same calculation. So this is reflecting the concept of mutually assured destruction, which governed the geopolitics during the Cold War. The United States and the NATO powers versus the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc all had enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other several times over the moment any one of them launched an ICBM. So it forced both sides into more tactical negotiations and game theory, proxy conflicts, and economic pressures. That's why they called it the Cold War, because we never got nuclear hot, right? So in this world of Westeros, the dragons are the nukes. The economic pressures are things like the blockade of trade through the Gullet. The proxy conflicts would be the skirmishes between the Brackens and the Blackwoods, and the tactical negotiations would be what happens in this episode, Rhaenyra's Operation Sister Act, which is really a version of Grand Maester Orwyle's failed attempt in Fire and Blood to get Rhaenyra and Alicent to hear each other out. This back-channel communication is like the Moscow-Washington hotline established between the Pentagon and the Kremlin in 1963 after the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. In pop culture, this is known as the red telephone, but in reality, the hotline was never a telephone line, and there were never any red phones on the White House's Resolute desk. But by saying fear alone of the dragons is enough, Rhaenyra is also remembering her father Viserys telling her in episode 1 of the series that dragons are not the actual source of power for their family, but rather the fear of the dragons, and the threat of the dragons, the shadow they cast. Because in reality, none of these human beings actually have total control over these beasts. But Sir Alfred gets pretty condescending here.
The value of a sword is not within its scabbard.
And Rhaenys catches his condescension. Yet behind Sir Alfred, you can see Jace stirring. Both in this scene and in episode 2, Jace, you can see the background of the Black Council adjusting his hand on his pommel, clearly having an itchy trigger finger to unsheath this blade from its scabbard. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. We are halfway through 2024, which is as good a reason as any to take a second to check in with yourself. and take stock of your mental health. If that's something you could use some help with, try BetterHelp. BetterHelp makes starting therapy easier and less intimidating for a lot of people. First, use our link to go to their site, betterhelp.com/newrockstars. The site will ask you to answer a few questions so BetterHelp can match you up with one of their over 30,000 therapists who they think can help you out the most. The therapist they pick for you will have tons of experience dealing with whatever you're going through. Every single one of their therapists is licensed, has a master's or doctorate degree, and has spent over 3 years and 1,000 hours working with people just like you. You'll be matched to a therapist usually within 48 hours, so you can get started fast. We've been promoting BetterHelp for a while, and we've heard some amazing feedback from you guys. We got permission to share this review from one of our viewers who said, "I have had a few therapists over the last couple of years. My therapist was the most open and accommodating therapist I've ever had. He listened when I needed to talk and told me some hard truths when I needed to listen. I couldn't recommend him more." Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/newrockstars or choose New Rockstars during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Massey and Celtigar suggest Rhaenyra hide herself off of Dragonstone while they remain to conduct the war in her absence, completely underestimating how betrayed Rhaenyra felt when Daemon led the Black Council in her absence while she was in labor. So in a well-earned huff, she leaves, and Rhaenys reminds all these men that Rhaenyra wears the crown of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, whose reign of peace and prosperity outlasted all other Targaryen kings, including Aegon the Conqueror. While Aegon's crown, which is now worn by Aegon II, has the crimson rubies in it, the crown of Rhaenyra and Viserys and Viserys' grandfather Jaehaerys bears the crests of the other great houses of Westeros. So really that is the crown of someone who wants to unite all these houses and preserve them rather than burn them to the ground. So Rhaenys this episode must be flying back and forth on Mellies a lot, yet her hair still looks great when she has this rainy lunch date with Corlys on Driftmark. Rhaenys asks her husband to rename his heir from Joffrey, it was originally Luke, R.I.P., to Rhaena. She says it'll displease neither Rhaenyra nor the gods, which is interesting that she says this because it's the second time this episode Rhaenys has been showing concern about what the gods think about them. But rather than name a girl his heir and Lord of the Tides, Corlys would rather see their way forward. In other words,
let's go start making another one.
Back on Dragonstone, you could just barely make out the young dragon Tyraxes in his little kennel being carried by the Dragon Keepers. And again, I love how they give Tyraxes his own little cry, distinguishing it from Sea Smoke and Caraxes and Moondancer. There is briefly a second crate, which must be for Stormcloud. It's even smaller, roughly the size of a cooler or a baby crib. But then there's another container that carries 4 eggs. 1 egg's gold, 1 egg's red, 1 egg's periwinkle or gray, and then 1 is like a dark green or black color. Now, in Fire and Blood, Rhaena is given 3 eggs, so why is she given 4 here? Well, something happens with one of these eggs. We'll talk about it in the spoiler dungeon, but I think they wanted to have 3 left over instead of 2 left over to make those 3 leftover eggs the eggs of Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones. The dark red one could be for Drogon, the green one could be for Rhaegal, the golden one could be for Viserion, which would just leave this other periwinkle one that we'll talk about in the spoiler dungeon. Now remember, Dany receives those 3 fossilized eggs as a wedding present in Game of Thrones Season 1 from Illyrio of Pentos, and Pentos is where Rhaenyra told Rhaena to take Aegon and Viserys. Now readers from the books and other George R. R. Martin writings have long believed that Dany's eggs were actually laid by Dreamfire, Helena's dragon, but it's looking like HBO with this show wants to establish this different link. And it makes sense, right? They know that everyone watching this show wants like more and more references to the Game of Thrones era, and that's why they started this season with Cragen Stark at the wall, and why they introduced this whole idea of the Song of Ice and Fire and the prince that was promised. Helaena tells her mother Alicent that as queen, she should be above the grief felt by common people, but Alicent tells her daughter that sadness is a condition of motherhood. I gotta say, I love this show's deepening of Helaena as a multi-dimensional yet still tragic character. In George R. R. Martin's Fire and Blood at this point, she just basically goes crazy, which, you know, makes sense. She's gone through the worst things imaginable. But the writers and this actor Fia Saban's takes the character in this deeper direction. She's a stilted product of royal upbringing, denied a normal life. Yet they still give Helaena this inner world of prophecies and bugs. She's a bug girl. And I love that about her on the show. She's got these little cages that she fiddles with. And we learned in the episode 1 behind the scenes video, these carry spiders and beetles and all kinds of bugs. And Helaena forgives her mother in the scene. But for what? but she forgives her for dooming Helaena into a political conflict where her children would be targets, children that she had to bear with her brother, because that's how you maintain power in this family. Remember, Rhaenyra's original plan in season 1 was to ascend the throne as Viserys wanted for her, and then she proposed marrying Helaena to her son Jace. But in that scene in the small council chamber, Alicent cut her off just because she had just had a kid and was leaking breast milk, and that did not need to be embarrassing, but she made her feel bad for that and basically used that to discount everything Rhaenyra was proposing. But think about that alternate timeline. Jace's strong genes and his upbringing singing Laenor's sea shanties and fishing. Meanwhile, Helena's in the garden, bug girling. What a marriage that could have been. They even danced together in the next episode, and it seems like a wonderful what if. Now, yes, they are first cousins, which is kind of gross, but not as gross as her having to marry her brother Aegon. I much prefer Jace with Baela. I like their whole target practice date last episode, but from Helena's point of view, what a life that could have been. And it was a life that was taken away from her by Alicent. Meanwhile, Aegon plays dress up in the Conqueror's armor. Larys warns Aegon that some are saying that the real reason he wants to ride out to war is this.
Another is that his grace was outwitted by his counsellors and persuaded to fly to war with Sir Criston.
It's the same fear Rhaenyra felt in the Black Council, being supplanted by her council and advisors. Even though Aegon was never at risk for this, Alicent and Aemond wanted him to stay, but Larys is smart enough to know that the threat of Aegon losing his power to the rest of his family is the only way to get him to stay. Larys also says,
Tales take on a life of their own, like weeds.
He's echoing the words of Rhaenys and Sir Simon in this episode, that the real truth of history is always going to take on a life of its own. So to thank him, Aegon names Lord Larys Master of Whisperers, which is what Varys was in Game of Thrones, essentially the royal chief of spycraft and intelligence. And then there's this interesting moment where Aegon seems to now be acting kingly by telling Leon and Martin and Eddard that they're now bound by a chastity vow on the King's Guard, and they can't go out fooling around in brothels anymore. Yet, later in this episode, he's totally going out partying with them anyway. So ultimately, no wisdom ever truly sticks with Aegon. And then in the Street of Silk, a dragon puppet seems to be drawn across a clothesline to drop a bag of coins to this woman, and then that woman hands off that coin pouch to another woman, which I'm just assuming is some kind of discreet transaction for sex work, or maybe just a very elaborate pickpocket operation. But as the camera follows that woman, it's really the beginning of a complicated tracking shot, and I just think they just did that to show off. Like, in addition to the camera following actors, we had this whole Rube Goldberg clothesline operation. Aren't we great at camera work and blocking, viewer? Give us our Emmys! But it is a very effective tracking shot when it comes to the point of view of the character of Ulf. It's kind of like Scorsese's tracking shot in Goodfellas, with Henry Hill taking Karen into the restaurant through the back way in the kitchens, because this is just a guy who knows everyone. Remember, we met Ulf last episode, Ulf the White. He was the guy who saw the hanging rat catchers. Now, inside this pub, the barmaid who serves them and gets slapped on the butt is Diana from season 1. This is the servant in the Red Keep whom Aegon assaulted and then Alicent gave the moon tea to. And we should always remember that moment because it exposed Alicent's complete hypocrisy for Rhaenyra's night on the town when they were younger. Like, she doesn't hold that same standard to her own sons at all, or to herself in the amount of time she's hooking up with Sir Criston. So I just like these details to show how small of a town King's Landing actually is. Like, everyone knows each other, and Aegon has all these personal relationships scattered all over the city, like that bastard son in the fighting pit. Ulf the White claims he's the son of Baelon the Brave. Baelon was the father to Viserys and Daemon, the son of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, which, according to Ulf, would make him the bastard half-brother to those two. And even though he would be a bastard, he says, being the son of a king, especially after Baelon died, leaving Jaehaerys I in that tough spot to choose an heir in the Great Council of 101, would make any royal bastard a threat.
A dragon seed must watch his own neck.
So the term dragon seed is a term meaning a bastard born of Valyrian descent, and it's going to be very important from this point forward. In Fire and Blood, Ulf's exact Valyrian ancestry is never truly identified, but for his father to be Baelon is pretty doubtful, because Baelon from a young age was close to his sister Alyssa, that would be Viserys and Daemon's mother, and when Alyssa died in childbirth with their third son, who would have been another kid named Aegon, I know, Baelon's other sister, Visera, tried to seduce Baelon, and still he sent her away. So he's not the kind of guy who would be sleeping around. It is possible that he sired a bastard with some random woman. It's just unlikely. And it seems like Ulf just picked a Targaryen father in the family tree who was at one point heir to the throne. The others deny Ulf based on his hair color, and then Aegon enters the pub, and Ulf goes, oof, and suddenly changes his tune. But notice how Aegon does not even notice Diana right next to him as she pours his wine. But you know, ain't that true for the king? He's not gonna remember one of the many women he probably assaulted, but she remembers, and she quickly turns away after pouring his wine. Aegon finds Aemond with Sylvie, whom Aegon says was Aemond's first, which Sylvie kind of hinted at when Aemond and Sir Criston sought Aegon at that brothel when they were looking for him back in season 1, episode 9. Rhaenyra puts away Aegon and Viserys' toys that they had been playing with last episode, including that small model of Dragonstone. The female figure that she holds in her hand might be a version of herself, you know, queen of the Black faction. When she puts these away, she finds the green Hightower waxed scroll that was sent by Alicent. She never read it, but now she gives it a look. And the words we see on the left side of the scroll include Rhaenyra, I write, and then lest the, and then battling all the hours, might also wish to something, and then to the mother for, and then along with the hope that something. But to the mother is probably part of a sentence like, I pray to the mother for comfort or for mercy. And this mention of the mother, one of the gods of the seven, could be what inspires Rhaenyra to meet at the statue of the mother in the Sept. Sir Gwayne breaks away from Sir Criston's host to crash in a pub for the night and says that he'll meet up at first light. And on the words at first light, that's when Criston becomes aware of the shifting light around them and then looks up to see something in the glare of the sun, a dragon. Baela rides her dragon Moondancer, patrolling the crownlands around King's Landing at Rhaenyra's orders last episode. Moondancer is a pale green dragon, and the show distinguishes it by giving it these dark green stripes on its wings, its neck, and its tail fins. Baela spots a bit of light glaring off their armor on the ground below and turns into a dive, chasing them into the tree line, but she pulls up at the last second. It sounds like she might have screamed the word Visot, which means up in High Valyrian, and then she circles above the tree line, trying to see them beneath, but being unable to, she yells, Sauvace, which means fly. Gerardus confirms that Lord Ferring has reported a large host is heading up to Rosby. House Ferring is another house in the Crownlands, and Lord Simon Staunton asks to return to Rook's Rest to fortify his lands. Back at Harrenhal, we see a weirwood tree initially, a weirwood tree being a representation of the old gods and the children of the forest, just kind of looking up into the castle. And then we go into Daemon's chamber where water is dripping. And even though it's no longer raining, it's just roof water making its way down from the upper levels to this chamber. And we see Daemon from overhead, which kind of feels a bit voyeuristic, almost like the gods are looking down at him, watching him here. Because as we see, this is all part of a dream that he's in. Someone tries to push into his room, but then relents, and then Daemon follows a woman's lullaby to a chamber with a roaring fire. The fact that there's a roaring fire here alone tells us it's a dream, because remember, Sir Simon said, Simon says, that such fires are rare in this damp castle. And just following a lullaby, doesn't it remind us of Daemon's creepy Valyrian lullaby at the end of season 1 as he walked through the Dragonmont to approach Vermithor? And then, surprise, Millie Alcock returns as young Rhaenyra. We haven't seen her since season 1, episode 5, before the time jump. She's now sewing the severed head of Jaehaerys back on. I'm assuming it's probably the prosthetic dummy again that we saw in the behind the scenes featurette, and she complains about having to clean up Daemon's messes. Since this is a point of view shot, we may be seeing Daemon how he always sees Rhaenyra, as a child. And now in this dream, he feels emasculated, having to be mothered by a girl who throws his guilt back in his face over the murder of Prince Jaehaerys. And if you look closely, it looks like Rhaenyra might be wearing the necklace that Daemon gave her in season 1. So he's seeing not just a girl, he's seeing the girl who he thought he had influence over before she traded out that necklace. This whole theme of having to sew things back together ties back into the opening tapestry imagery of this season, the threads of fate weaving through our lives and through our deaths. And if you think about it, the preparation for Jaehaerys' body for the funeral procession, which involved this kind of sewing, was done by the Silent Sisters, which is an order of nuns. So this might be foreshadowing Rhaenyra's disguise as a nun in the final part of this episode. But now Daemon finds himself outside beside the weirwood tree, and Alys Rivers is there watching him and says,
"You will die in this place."
So actor Gail Rankin is Scottish, but to my ear, this line sounded like it might have been an American accent, like the accent Gail Rankin uses in the show Glow.
"You will die in this place."
Or, you know, it might still just be a Scottish accent, and these words are just hitting shared vowel sounds across the different accents. And I was thinking, hey, maybe in the world of Game of Thrones, an American accent is so weird and modern and out of place that it just sounds so like supernatural and like wrong and otherworldly. But either way, with this echo, her voice has this supernatural quality, which is odd because I don't think Daemon's dreaming anymore. It seems like he sleepwalked to the weirwood tree and he's now awake, looking out over the God's Eye Lake. Because from this point, we never see Daemon wake up after this. So weirwood trees have a link to the old gods of the Children of the Forest and the power of prophecy. The God's Eye Lake specifically would be the eye of an old forgotten god who can still peer into our souls and see our futures. And the pupil of that eye would be the Isle of Faces island, where the Children of the Forest may still be residing. In fact, the ghosts that people have heard in Harrenhal over the years may have been the whispers of the Children of the Forest echoing across the lake. So really, I think Alys Rivers is a woods witch on the show. She has a connection to the Children of the Forest and the old gods, but there's more to say here that I just have to wait for the spoiler dungeon on. Yet as Alys walks away, you hear a bit of humming, which suggests that the hummed lullaby that Daemon heard from Rhaenyra was actually all Alys's doing. She is the one who had this effect on Daemon. So Mysaria explains how Rhaenyra could sneak into King's Landing.
But most folk pay no mind to a woman who has not dressed as a queen or lured herself with the eyes of men.
Rhaenyra nods because she remembers dressing as a boy to sneak out of the Red Keep in season 1. So dressed as a septa, and with Sir Steffan in disguise as a septon, they make their way to the old sept. Now this is not the great sept that we saw in Game of Thrones, the one that exploded at the end of season 6, because that structure will not be built until the time of Baelor the Blessed, several years after this. But you could see a fountain held up by these lions, making me wonder if it was paid for by the Lannisters, but this will be the spot that will later be the pedestal where the statue of Baelor will be, I think. But Rhaenyra's sister act mission in this episode does not happen in the book Fire and Blood at all. It is, I will admit, a bit silly, but as this conflict starts heating up, I think it's important for the two leads of the show to be able to share the same space again so that they can just hear each other out without any distractions from the men of their councils. And they are back at the altar of the Mother, the same place where they prayed together as younger women in season 1. And we learned that Rhaenyra has not fully gamed out what would happen after Alicent screamed and then Rhaenyra had stabbed her and then Rhaenyra got arrested, which I think might be Rhaenyra's honest way of showing Alicent, look, I really do just want to talk here. I have no further endgame beyond this. Yet directly behind them is a statue for the warrior, one of the other 7. So these two mothers are caught between the violence of the warrior and the mercy of the mother. Rhaenyra brings up the tourney that they watched together in the first episode of the series and how these men are so eager to fight and to kill. And as young women, they saw the futility and the danger of that bloodlust. Yet they're still unable to resist trading barbs and getting that off their chests until a random septa comes to light a candle and they have to go quiet and retreat to their corners. That pause allows them to reevaluate. In a way, it seems like the mother's mercy is trying to intervene here and to help them. Rhaenyra claims Viserys maintained her as the heir on his last day alive, but Alicent claims with a projected certainty, he changed his mind, Rhaenyra. He changed his mind. And she adds,
I swear this to you on the memory of my mother.
Ah, a callback to Rhaenyra's swear in the Godswood of King's Landing when Alicent asked her if she had slept with Daemon.
Daemon never touched me. I swear this to you upon the memory of my mother.
Rhaenyra used that moment to shame Alicent, even hinting that the accusation was treason. And sure enough, over the years, Rhaenyra ended up siring 2 kids with Daemon. So Alicent is signaling that she remembers that false swear and that sin against the gods. Yet, after things calm down for a beat, Alicent reveals,
But he spoke Aegon's name. He said he was the prince that was promised to unite the realm.
There it is. Rhaenyra knows now that all of Alicent's certainty was really grounded in a misinterpretation. Viserys was not naming his new heir. He was talking about his ancestral fear from Aegon the Conqueror of the threat from the north that would destroy the realm unless the Targaryens sat the Iron Throne.
He spoke to you of the Song of Ice and Fire, about Aegon the Conqueror.
And Alicent just kind of responds, the Conqueror? Which signals to Rhaenyra that for Alicent to make that mistake, it would mean that Viserys had never told her that story and that Viserys had never considered Aegon the rightful heir. Another septa lights a candle, interrupting this moment, and like the bell of a boxing ring, they are back to being opponents and Alicent leaves. There is an overhead shot of this circular altar, which matches the frame of the overhead shot of the circular table at Harrenhal, because both Daemon and Rhaenyra are left coming up empty in these side quests to force foes in Westeros to submit to them without bloodshed. And both of these shortcomings happen upon sacred ground in the eyes of the gods, looking down at them. For Rhaenyra, it's the new gods in the Sept. For Daemon, it's the old gods before the weirwood tree outside Harrenhal, looking out the God's Eye Lake. And we come back to Rhaenys' warning in this episode.
There is no war so hateful to the gods as a war between kin.
The gods have punished the Brackens and the Blackwoods in equal measure, and we'll see next episode these gods work in mysterious ways. We end as always in the spoiler dungeon, where we will be discussing some spoilery plot details from the book Fire and Blood for upcoming episodes, and be warned, we're going to talk about some major deaths. Now, before we get into the spoiler dungeon, please support us by grabbing a House of the Dragon inspired shirt design that we have at nerdriot.shop, like this one. I love it. I've been wearing it all the time. Also, big announcement, Nerd Riot is doing a 4th of July sale starting today, Monday, July 1st. They're going big with 30% off site-wide. It's going to be the biggest sale until the holidays this year, and it's going to last through the end of July 4th weekend. So be sure to take advantage of this and support new Rockstars by grabbing something at nerdriot.shop. Okay, spoiler 1. The Battle of Rook's Rest is coming next episode, episode 4. The host led by Sir Criston up into the Crownlands is headed up toward Lord Simon Staunton's home of Rook's Rest. Now, in Fire and Blood, Aemond plots with Sir Criston to lure out one of the Black dragons into this fight with Vhagar. But here in episode 3, it at least seems like Aemond and Vhagar were going to sit out, and it wasn't until the brotherly contest between Aegon and Aemond in the small council chamber, followed by Larys telling Aegon that he was at risk of Aemond stealing his glory, followed by Aegon humiliating Aemond in the brothel, that will really lead to both brothers and their dragons charging into this battle and leading to a 2-on-1 dragon fight. Meanwhile, all of Rhaenys' hand-wringing that the gods will punish the wars of kin versus kin, and that she and Corlys don't have enough time to produce another heir. All of these are really setting up her and Melly's death next episode, and it's gonna suck. Okay, spoiler 2. Rhaena, Joffrey, Aegon Viserys, the Vale, Pentos, and these eggs. In Fire and Blood, Rhaena and Joffrey do go to the Vale and join Lady Jane, but Aegon and Viserys do not go with them to the Vale. They stay on Dragonstone a little longer, and then they're sent in a separate voyage via boat to Essos, but their ship is attacked by the Triarchy, and young Aegon narrowly escapes clutching Stormcloud, while Viserys goes on a wild journey and washes up somewhere else, but both of these kids end up surviving and coming back into power in the future. So this 4th periwinkle egg in the clutch will most likely hatch into Rhaenyra's dragon Morning in the Vale. I assume that the other 3 eggs will become Dany's eggs. I'm just wondering how those eggs and these 2 younger boys will end up in Pentos if Rhaena doesn't go with them and stays in the Vale. Rhaenyra ordered her to accompany them to be a mother to them in Pentos. And these boys cannot die because both will eventually become kings in the years after the Civil War. It actually makes me wonder if on their current voyage from Dragonstone to the Vale, that could be where the group gets attacked by the Triarchy and separated. And then Aegon and Viserys will be thought to be lost, but actually survive it, and that Rhaena will save one of these eggs, and that the other 3 will plunge into the waters of the Narrow Sea or Blackwater Bay. And then years from now, they'll be found and end up in the hands of Illyrio and Pentos, and that Joff and Rhaena will just end up in the Vale that way. Okay, spoiler 3. Let's talk about Ulf the White, a man who doesn't mind talking shit about the Greens and proclaiming Rhaenyra and Jace's rightful line of succession, who also claims Valyrian descent and uses the term dragon seed. Yes, he will be one of the bastards recruited by the Blacks to bond with dragons on Dragonstone, along with Adam of Hull and Hugh Hammer. Ulf will pair with the dragon Silverwing, the dragon of Queen Alysanne, while Hugh Hammer will ride Vermithor. But notice how quick Ulf was to shout, "All hail King Aegon!" It shows that he won't always be as steadfastly loyal to the Blacks. Okay, spoiler 4, let's talk about Alys Rivers and Daemon. Daemon does not have a relationship with Alys Rivers in Fire and Blood. She actually becomes the bedmate and partner to Aemond during his time in Harrenhal. But Aegon's abrupt separation of Aemond from Sylvie seems to be leading Aemond to seek someone new, and that new someone is going to be Alys Rivers. But it's interesting how the show gives us this episode between Alys and Daemon, which really just seems to be to rattle the character of Daemon with this fear of the future, which brings us back to this line.
You will die in this place.
So yes, book readers will know that later on in Fire and Blood, in this war will be the battle above the God's Eye, where Daemon on Caraxes and Aemond on Vhagar collide over the God's Eye Lake beside Harrenhal, and according to Fire and Blood, both dragons and both men crash into the lake and die. However, while the corpse of Vhagar is found, with the armored corpse of Aemond still on him, and that Caraxes crawled out of the water but died beside the castle, Daemon's body is never found, and some believe that he might have survived and run off with the dragon rider of Nettles. Now, Alys Rivers is the one who tells him that he's going to die here. She will be a witness to this battle. She's there at Harrenhal, pregnant with Aemond's child when that battle happens. And I think there's always been some fascinating parallelism among Aemond's Sapphire Eye and the God's Eye Lake, and the way that he dies by Daemon driving Darksister into his eye socket. And now the eyes of the Weirwood tree's faces bleeding, being used to look into the future by the Woods Witch of Alys Rivers. So tying Daemon into this prophecy in the show makes him yet another victim of the power of dreams. names in this Targaryen family. Helaena is a victim of prophecies. Rhaenyra is a victim of prophecies. All of them are victims of misinterpreting dreams, right? And now that Daemon has been told a possible future for him on the show, could that give him an advantage that the character did not have in the book? Like, might Daemon take some extra care or take some extra risks so that he could make it out of that battle alive? As the wildest rumors of the book speculate, and it's similar to Laenor being left alive on the show in secret, because think about it that way, HBO could continue to keep Matt Smith in the cast. He is arguably their biggest star, because otherwise losing Matt Smith and what's probably going to be the big battle of season 3 is just going to make it really hard for HBO to continue the series after that. Comment down below with your thoughts. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.